want to get back to our top story this afternoon, the ongoing conflict with Iran. We know a lot of you, like us, have questions about the situation and the possible impact it could have on all of us. News 4's Corey Stark joins us live this afternoon with a foreign policy expert.
Claire, thank you. I'm joined by Dr. Krister Knapp from Washington University. He does lectures on terrorism and the war in Iraq. Dr. Knapp, thanks for joining us this afternoon. So there has been tensions with Iran, of course, for decades. But the things that we've seen over the last week, and of course this latest escalation, what does this tell you about the relationship right now with Iran?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on, Corey. It tells us a couple things. In the past, most of the conflict between Iran, or more recently between Iran and the United States, has been of a kind of a lower level, indirect kind. But what we've seen is a kind of ratcheting up to things of the past, say during the tanker war between Iraq and Iran in 1987, 88, when the U.S. ships ran into a couple of mines that Iraq had put in the Straits of Hormuz and around the Persian Gulf. And we also downed an airliner that was there, and we had to fire on some of their oil rigs. So there was direct kinetic, meaning live wartime attacks between the United States and Iraq during that period. And it looks like we've returned to that for a little bit right now. What President Trump was able to do today with the off-ramp was to ratchet down tensions and help us get back to a time where the tensions are a little bit less, and so that we have more sort of indirect kind of contact rather than this direct war kind of contact.
Whenever there's conflict in the Middle East, a lot of people think about their own pocketbooks, specifically with oil prices and gas. Do you expect gas prices to go up because of this?
There might be a little bit of a bump. Every time there's a sort of crisis like this, you tend to see a little of a bump in oil prices. But Persian oil is under sanctions right now, and most of the oil that the Iranians sell is to China and other countries like that. The oil that the U.S. is able to secure comes largely out of Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia works very closely with the United States in keeping prices at very controlled levels. And so while there might be a temporary bump, basically I think oil prices will remain fairly stable, and St. Louisans don't have much to worry about.
And you mentioned sanctions. Of course, sanctions are already implemented on Iran, but President Trump saying more sanctions will be put in place. How do you expect Iran to retaliate to that?
So I think you're going to, even though after there were no Americans killed, thankfully, with the attacks last night, I think that you're probably going to see more indirect kind of things. The way that Iran tends to work is more asymmetrically in what we call the gray zone. And so you're probably going to see some cyber attacks, some intel kinds of things, some terrorist attacks through proxy groups, but most likely in the Middle East on some of our allies and some of our interests there. And so there's not much they can really do about the sanctions. They are hurting economically and financially, and so they will continue engaging in their typical asymmetrical behavior.
Dr. Knapp, appreciate your time once again.